Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Feeling Seen podcast, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. I'm here with a treasure of an actor today that I've been, honestly, when I started doing this podcast, it was another one of those people who I hoped I would get the chance to talk to. Just this year, you might know any of his work from Section 8 to Expired to Glorious, all of which will treat you to very different things. Historically, if you're a fan of Australian television, you might know him from Home and Away. If you're a fan of American television, you might know him from True Blood. And if you're a fan of independent comedies, you might know him from the Knights of Badassdom, as I sure do. Ryan Kwanten, what else do the people need to know before we get started with the conversation today?
Wow, Jordan, that was quite the epic introduction in terms of my work life. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
It's nice to sort of have an interviewer that has not just done her research, but is also a fan. So it's, particularly Knights of Badassdom. That's one that I know. If you know that one has slipped through the cracks.
That one has slipped through the cracks very unjustly. It is a wonderful, delightful time. And I'm friends with Summer Glau, actually. And I will say, I will take this moment to say she only had the kindest, nicest things to say about you. So while I have always enjoyed your work, that engendered you to me in a very special, additional way, knowing that Summer only reported back the most kind and delightful news about you.
Oh, well, she was amazing. But the cast in general was such a sort of a Comic-Con like fantasy. It really was. Like everyone just had their own unique alley.
So I think the latest that will bring us to this conversation, I believe, is Section 8. I've kind of I know Glorious comes out right shortly before this, and then Section 8's coming out on the heels of that. You had Expired, which I think in Australia might have been known as Loveland. So There are multiple titles to that one. You've had a very busy year of output in very different disciplines of kinds of movies. I wanted to just sort of set the stage talking about where you feel like you are creatively to be kind of dabbling in all of these different kinds of films coming out right now. Obviously, they film at different times, but how are you, Ryan Kwanten, these days, the creative being?
Look, I really do love sort of, if you look back at the history of my work, particularly recently, most of it is in genre. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's for me where I kind of like to make my bread and butter. That's where I feel like emotionality can be at its highest too. Mm-hmm. I feel like if you can get someone to laugh, you got more chance of getting them to go, to crying and feeling sort of the true gamut of the human emotion sort of spectrum. So for me, whether it's sort of sci-fi or, something like Section 8, which is more of your independent action kind of movie. Mm-hmm. I still want to bring an element of, rawness, emotionality to it.
I like rawness as a pivot into the character that is going to sort of be the backbone of our conversation today. I'm very excited about this. You've brought a wonderfully ambitious choice in Russell Crowe's Maximus Decimus Meridius from the 2000 landmark action drama Gladiator. That is an incredible pick, Ryan.
Well, it was a tough pick because it was that one, but I figured for the sake of Section 8, it was a pretty good kind of segue. My other pick was actually Eddie Murphy playing Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop. Also sort of a sort of theoretically an action movie, comedy action. But again, I guess the reason it came down to those two was because I just love the way that their lead actors transformed sort of the genre, sort of made it, I think originally Beverly Hills Cop, from what I heard, was sort of offered to Sylvester Stallone, and what a different movie that would have been had he had taken it. And just seeing what, when you let someone of the talent of Eddie Murphy sort of go to town on an action movie, it just sort of comes to life, and it still to this day plays so well. And look, for the sake of this one too, I thought the same thing. Russell Crowe, in the sake of any other actor's hands, it could have fallen short. It could have felt cliche, like we've seen that type of story 1,000 times. But to give it weight, to give it I know there was an enormous amount of sort of script revisions that Russell and Ridley kind of worked on to sort of get it to that point. They added a lot of the sort of the Stoic philosophy to it as well, which I thought was really sort of powerful.
Nothing happens to anyone that he is not fitted by nature to bear.
Now, that was kind of the dawn of that, a lot of that philosophy, Stoic philosophy too, being Marcus Aurelius.
The thing that I really started thinking a lot about was, and I spoke to about this to producer Marissa as well when we got that selection from you, which is that within the context of Maximus, there is, we were like, which sort of avenue of Maximus, we were wondering, was the thing that kind of pinged most with you, because there is Maximus the leader, there is Maximus the slave, there is Maximus the widower, there is Maximus essentially the sort of revolutionary, overthrowing the gladiatorial structure of domination imposed by Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus and the Emperor's rule. And perhaps it's an amalgamation of so many of those things. But what was it that you were finding as sort of like the primary cell of the Maximus performance that really wheedled in and got to you?
It's a great question. There's lots of sort of quotable lines, but for me, it's like what hits me to the core, what, shakes my very marrow. And for me, if there was one image, it's seeing and feeling Russell Crowe sort of put his lips up against his charcoaled wife's foot at the very beginning, and he's sort of got snot running out of his nose, and he's kissing that, the foot of his brutalized wife. That for me is where I kind of look to the performance as being pretty damn powerful, and how does a man or, how does a human sort of carry on in the face of that type of trauma? And so, as a segue across to sort of section 8, that's when my character loses his wife and his young son. How does one pick up the pieces? There is that sort of psychological warfare that you're playing with yourself. What reason, what purpose do you have to get up in the morning to continue to take breaths?
My family was burnt and crucified while they were still alive.
I knew nothing.
Don't lie to me!
Yeah, so I like characters where you kind of feel like you have to pick them back up off the canvas. They're wounded beyond all measure, and it's the kind of wound that will never heal. That for me is really powerful and captivating stuff.
As I was like reading interviews that you had done for various projects over various periods of time, the thing that you talked about in an interview around Expired coming out was you talked about how over the past kind of 10 years you found yourself drawn to darker characters, and also characters that you can really, you said like the word was melt into them. So there was a sort of dissociation from the recognizable Ryan Kwanten into someone, into something anonymous that could become something real on its own. And I wanted to talk to you about sort of that relationship that you have as both an actor but also like a professional in this industry. What is your relationship with that kind of recognition, and how has that evolved over time? Because I would imagine like at very high exposure points, like that can kind of change approaches to decision making or how you relate to yourself as an actor, as a tool, as a vessel. Like, how has that path been for you?
Incredible. I feel like acting has very much been a form of therapy in my life, and the choice to go darker with a lot of my, I would say the last decade of characters has very much been I must say kind of pretty much ever since True Blood, I really did want to do characters that were not comedic, that had, a real kind of, not necessarily an evil to them, but just a sort of a harrowing nature to them, I guess, a hauntedness. And that for me was sort of, I like to think I'm pretty even keeled as a person and pretty kind of laid back. So it was a real kind of exploration into the darker realms of, what makes me me. And I think everyone's got, everyone needs to, at some point in their life, shine a light into those dark places of themselves.
And I read you talk about something to that effect as well, saying that like you know, that there is a sort of surprising amount, obviously, within all of us, once we start to peel back those layers in terms of like, you know, and you talked about acting, making film and television as a form of exercising kind of demons in that way. And I wondered what are things that you have found as you have begun to do that work, and what are sort of outcomes that you found you've had in going into these certain, I would imagine, very deliberately chosen characters to sort of align with this value set of role selection at this time in your life? Like, what have you worked through some of these darker journeys you've gone on?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, you know, I'm still sort of working through,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some of it that I just don't want to talk about. But
Fair.
But in terms of on a project to project basis, it's all very different. You know, here for Section 8, you know, I'm playing a returning to tour kind of Marine that's suffered a pretty severe case of PTSD, and then toppling that now with the loss of his wife and kid.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to go to a place inside of yourself that to give that story credence, to give, you know, that character weight, and to justify the violence that sort of follows.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was far more important to, really jump as deep into that psychological world of him than the physical. I knew the physical would come. It was more like a muscle memory type thing,
Mm-hmm.
but to sort of live and breathe this guy's life was going to be a real trick. But that's something that I've kind of really learned to live with too, was, you know, even with Glorious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was only a 3.5 week shoot, but it was pretty much me on screen the entire time.
That must have put you through it throughout that 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, but I'm a bit of a masochist at heart. So I sign up to these things, and you have to be a little bit crazy to want to be in this business, and even crazier to last, and last happily. Like, I really do love what I do, and I love the level of camaraderie that exists, particularly in independent film. It's just so freaking beautiful. There's not a day, even an hour on set, where I don't sort of pinch myself, think A, how lucky I am, and B, you know, where it does remind me of how good humans can be when we work towards a common goal, you know, when we have something passionate
Mm-hmm.
to sort of fight for, to get up in the morning for. I think for me, it's such a good kind of recourse of the human spirit.
Well, and that you actually touched on two things just now that I wanted to get to with you, and I'm gonna come back to the independent film question. But first, I'm gonna go to because you said like with a performance like Section 8, and I think Inglorious, very much so too. Like you said, the physicality would come, and you knew that. And I wanted to ask you about your relationship with physicality in performance, and watching something like Gladiator 2, like that's such a visceral role. Like it's such a meaty, just sort of hands like meat hooks of Russell Crowe's role, pounding his way through this movie for as sensitive and vulnerable as it is as well. And then I feel like I think of you as a very physical performer, like from something that is, you know, your role had a lot of comedy to it, but a lot of sensitivity. We're not glossing over Jason Stackhouse in this conversation and his emotionally dynamic nature.
Well, everybody's different, you know. Some things come hard, some things come easy. For me, math was hard. Girls weren't.
It's because you're sweet and kind. It's got nothing to do with what you look like. And if you're telling yourself that, you're selling yourself short.
Bridget, if I was sweet and kind, none of this would be happening.
But I feel like that was a very physical role in how you embodied it. And obviously Section 8 is Inglorious is a very physical performance too, particularly for something that takes place entirely in a rest stop bathroom. And so I wanted to hear from you about your relationship with physicality within character and like what sort of comes first with you. Is it like working through it emotionally and finding that kernel to hold on to? Or is it like finding the physicality and sort of like the animal nature of a character?
Inside out.
Mm.
Yeah. I usually find for me, particularly as I've gone on in my career, that if the lines are sort of hard to learn, then it's usually not something for me. But if and I don't mean that just because it's going to take take time to learn. It's just if it speaks to me straight out of the gate. Sometimes I can read something once and just know it. It's embedded in there. It's like it's speaking from a part of me. You know, you have those great. I'm not comparing myself to these guys at all, but you hear stories of songwriters, whether it's sort of Van Morrison or whatnot, that sort of when he's asked about how did he come up with the lyrics to a particular song, he says it came through me. You know, I can't remember how it came, but it came through me. Like I feel like there's certain, you know, again, independent filmmakers, visionaries that I like to align myself with, that their characters speak to me in just a really natural and profound way. So for me, if once I get that, then it's pretty easy. The truth is already there then. You know, I don't have to work that hard for the truth. And I've always been a big fan of that anyway, in seeking that. I think audiences will forgive slight accent fuck ups, but they won't forgive you giving them fiction as opposed to really believing in what you're doing. But yeah, if I can see you or feel you laughing.
I think a consistent through line of your career is that you're actually really good with an American accent, particularly appealing Southern accent. Which another movie that I will say it somehow went through the cracks, but it shouldn't have. Hurricane Heist. Honestly, one of the most entertaining action movies of the past 10 years. If you guys haven't watched Hurricane Heist yet, you should super do that.
That's the Alabama Slam, baby.
A thing that struck me about both Glorious and Section 8 for being called upon to be, you know, quite different arcs within your characters in that movie, I was really impressed by how feral you felt in both of those roles. Like, it was just sort of like an animal uncaged. And to know that is sort of like the thing that emanates from, I'm really interested in that concept of like how material that you know you're going to be sort of more at home in is something that just sort of maps on you more quickly. Like, I think that is a fascinating element of like a marriage of like the emotional and the physical of just knowing that like when a script is something that's going to be for you, it's going to like actually imprint and be easier for you to put back out into the world like almost immediately.
Yeah, I love that choice of word too, Jordan. Feral. You know, that's such a it is something that I search for in characters. You know, and I've been sort of blessed in the last couple of years to have characters that had a pretty unique case of feral. You know, because again, I have to highlight, like in these independent movies, I'm taking myself to places that are uncomfortable, that are vulnerable, but I'm surrounding myself with such good quality technicians, artists across the board. So everyone's putting in their blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. So I feel like, you know, that's the least that I can do is sort of expose myself in that way.
And and to the independent cinema conversation, I wondered, you know, you've worked on very like high gloss and like big production stuff. Like I feel like True Blood was truly like it's a landmark in prestige television. It became an HBO juggernaut. It's very stylish. And then, but you speak so passionately, and it seems like so frequently, about your desire to, you know, not only work with independent filmmakers, but work with like new and emerging filmmakers. I've heard you talk about that specifically. And I wanted to hear about what is the difference in creative collaboration between like you and sort of the people leading the charge in like a large production film television situation, like say like a True Blood or perhaps Home and Away, versus like the independent films that you do. How do those things activate you differently as a participant and actor?
Well, it's also based off of like where I was and who I was in my career at that time. You know, I was just insanely happy to get the True Blood gig, you know, to have the chance to be on HBO on an Alan Ball show, surrounding myself with, you know, Oscar winners like Anna Paquin. You know, it would take a braver person than me to say no to that. It was pretty So I was just happy to be, in camp. I was the happiest fly for honestly 7 seasons. It changed my life, that show.
Mm-hmm.
But it also guided me in such a way where I didn't have to make decisions based off of anything else other than how did they inspire me creatively.
Mm-hmm.
From that point on, I really wanted to be in charge of my own career and make choices that I felt passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, in terms of control, I do get more say in the independent movies. And I like that. I like that sense of collaboration with a writer and a director. I really do. And I feel like that relationship can be very symbiotic. It can be really beautiful. It reminds me of the stories that I've read and heard about filmmaking in the 70s, and some 60s. That there was an enormous amount of artist to artist collaboration. And a lot of times these days, we don't even get sort of rehearsals or anything like that. And back in the day, it used to happen a lot. Even in my early career, you'd get it at least a couple of days, and it's very rare these days that you get that. So you've got to kind of maximize that time of connection before you get to set as quickly as you can.
We'll be back with more from Ryan Kwanten after a short break. Then, rarely do we get to address breaking news on the One Quick Thing segment, everybody, but podcast favorite movie X has become podcast favorite trilogy? So I'll have one quick thing before I go to say about the upcoming movie, Maxine.
Are elephants right-handed?
What's the middlest size in the universe?
What is the history of fan fiction?
Let's find out together on our show, Let's Learn Everything, where we learn anything and everything interesting.
My name's Caroline, and I studied biodiversity and conservation.
My name's Tom, and I studied computer science and cognitive blah, 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 blah.
Did you? And my name's Ella, and I studied stem cells and regenerative medicine.
On our show, we do as much research as you would for a class, but we don't get in trouble for making each other laugh.
And we get to say
Maybe not in the trailer.
Subscribe to Let's Learn Everything every other Thursday on Maximum Fun.
Are you ready to binge watch something old?
The Greatest Generation is a podcast about Star Trek by a couple of hosts a little bit embarrassed to even have a Star Trek podcast. Hosted by me, Ben Harrison.
And me, Adam Pranica. We get into the critical, the technical, the science fictional aspects of the show we love, while roasting it and each other at the same time.
We've completed an entire series about Star Trek The Next Generation, and another one about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and we've just begun Star Trek Voyager, so now is a great time to start watching a new Star Trek series with us.
So subscribe to The Greatest Generation on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get your podcasts, and become a friend of DeSoto today.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen. I've been talking with the Australian actor Ryan Kwanten. Since he left his True Blood character, Jason Stackhouse, behind, he has been embracing all kinds of genre roles, including the recent horror, thriller, strange foray into the sadistic and supernatural, Glorious, and the upcoming action thriller, Section 8, which comes out on September 23rd. Let's get back to that conversation. It's very exciting. One of my favorite regional traditions of film in all the world is Australian genre cinema. I think it is just a best in class from a wonderful decades-long tradition going, obviously.
Well, that was, Mad Max was another one of my choices for today.
Well, now, okay, but what I like about a couple of those choices are, we have Russell Crowe, Australian actor, we have, obviously, Mad Max, Australian production. If there is a special resonance to you of being able to watch talent from the place you come from sort of succeed at that kind of level, if that plays any role in like watching these things and having them sort of embed specifically in you.
Definitely. like I said, it's those images that then sort of strike a chord within you, that I can recall better than sort of lines said. Does that make sense?
Oh,
it's like
totally.
what is that visceral response? What are those images that first come to mind when you think of these movies that have very much shaped the course of your life? For us, I remember like Beverly Hills Cop was one of sort of 3 or 4 VHS tapes that my grandma had at her place. And I was a pretty rambunctious little shit of a boy, and I would always run away from, mum or dad as they're trying to kind of beat me with the wooden spoon. And I'd run over to grandma's house and put on, her VHS and end up just watching kind of Beverly Hills Cop over and over again. So sometimes they're those movies that just reminds you of sort of times in your life. But then, there's those movies for me that also remind me of how great the art of sort of acting, or the art of sort of playing pretend can be. It's such a bizarre profession. It really is. Like we're
it's not like anything else.
I know, man. It's been around for so long that the art of sort of storytelling and we're gifted with this beautiful imagination. So, it would be a damn shame to not sort of use it. And it's funny, as you get older, you sort of, society tells you to sort of get more serious. But there's a part of, I think, growing older that you should never lose that sense of kind of, not necessarily innocence, but that childlike qualities are always, doesn't make you a child to have them.
And so where then, like with your, say like, so you have like this kind of 10-year run of, choosing these sort of like darker, like a lot of interiority within these characters, sort of underneath layers of sort of pain. And like you said, characters that need to be sort of picked up off the mat. And then as you go on in your years and you try to hold on to that sense of wonder, do you find yourself then like casting an eye forward? Do you find yourself like wanting to go to the Axel Foley of it more and go to that kind of strain of what pinged within you?
Yes.
I'm not taking any more of this shit from you. You know how much this little stunt of yours is going to cost this city?
I don't think cost is the issue here, sir. I think the issue should be my blatant disregard for proper procedure.
You damn right, wise ass.
For sure. I'm feeling like I'm coming out of this a little bit of the darkness. Although having said that, I've just finished shooting a first season of an FX series where I'm playing a rather heinous man again. But that's actually worth talking about too. That's Octavia E. Butler's sort of first work of a lovely, incredible writer.
Oh wow, yeah,
black writer from the late 70s. And this is the first piece of her work, Kindred, that's actually been put to film or television. So I
cannot believe how long it has taken for Octavia Butler to come to the big screen.
I know. So to sort of be leading the charge and knowing her beautiful legacy and the onus that we have on us to sort of give credence to her work, it's made it a really special sort of production. It was one of the reasons that I wanted to go back to television for. I sort of said after True Blood, it was such a beautiful long run that I kind of just wanted to do, more independent movies. And that's kind of what I was doing before True Blood. But if I was going to put my time and my effort into something, it was going to be something that had something to say on the macro level, not just sort of appeal to people's emotions, but it sort of had something deeper to say about where we are as a species.
I feel like you talked about that a lot around the release of Expired as well.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And well, that's filmmakers these days, particularly that's a Aussie filmmaker, Ivan Sen, for Expired, and also Seth Larney in 2067. He called it like a cli-fi, a climate thriller. Yeah, I mean, I that's where I feel like we as artists show our voices in the work that you choose to kind of commit to. And for me, I believe in the power of artistic healing, I guess.
Well, and okay, so then thinking then in terms of like, I feel like in the past 2 years, like film obviously has always had a lot to say. It's been a medium of empathy. Like this is a time honored tradition. But I feel like in the past sort of 5 to 6 years, there's been a lot of emphasis outright in the mainstream conversation on the interior nature of a film, the conscientiousness of being a conscientious creator and putting things out into the world with a lot of intention behind them. That obviously doesn't have to be everything, but I feel like there's been a lot of conversation around that. And from, you taking the sweep of sort of like the past 10 years and then coming into the last few with these, like you said, perhaps these cli-fi thrillers that you've been making, do you find that your variety of choice in wanting to make movies that have that sort of conscientiousness and intent behind them, do you find there is a difference in your volume of choice now compared to previously, or has it actually been about the same?
I feel like I've just got more specific, what's truly lighting the fire inside of me, and sometimes I'm not even aware that there is something burning inside until you read that script and you feel that, the writer's heartbeat sort of coming through, pulsing through the script. And it's like, wow, this is a train I need to jump on, and I will beg, borrow, steal, kill to get onto this, because it has something really purposeful to say, and there couldn't be a better time to kind of say it. Getting back to Octavia, like her work seems just as profound, if not more so, sort of now, and we need it now more than ever. So I can't help but feel that there's a myriad of filmmakers out there that are just not getting heard. So if I can lend my voice and, star power to these people to help them get their films financed, what a beautiful thing to be able to do. I never dreamed to be in this position. I never dreamed that I could be. And, I just worked with a couple of brothers recently on a film where I only did 5 days on it, but, they were just so unbelievably grateful. And I still see myself as this sort of first timer in many ways. So it's just, it's weird going into the setting an example type of mode in my life where I'm sort of beginning to play older characters and, fathers even. And seeing that sort of segue into my life has been kind of interesting too.
One of perhaps my most random personal dream, Ryan, is to start a film fund for young women starting out in Australian cinema. Because I know a few young women filmmakers in Australia who like have a very hard time getting started and breaking through the sort of like Screen Australia format and the sort of boys club that they recognize around them that they have a very hard time penetrating into. So knowing that you have this passion to be the car on which the trailer can be hitched to zoom forward, it's a very exciting thing for me personally to hear from you.
Yeah, well, look, I know I don't even see myself as the car. I think they're driving that car. I think I'll be, part of the baggage. And part.
Might be the gas in the tank, Ryan. You might be the gas in the tank.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful dream to have, and the more people that can kind of highlight those stories, I think that's my position on this earth, is to kind of help bring these people out, these stories out. Yeah, for sure. I love that. Yeah, look, Australia does have some wonderful filmmakers, as does everywhere, has some beautiful filmmakers that are just not getting heard. I've always made a point of going back to Australia and working with Aussie, directors and filmmakers, storytellers, because that was the industry that started me. And it is such a unique hodgepodge of a country in terms of the stories that come out of there are surprisingly universal, but at the same time very, very specific. Like you just wouldn't see the type of terrain, the type of cultural kind of shticks that happen in places. I don't know if you ever saw Muriel's Wedding.
For the first time, just 3 weeks ago, I saw Muriel's Wedding, and I looked up, I was like, did this come out the same year as Priscilla, Queen of the Desert? And it fucking did. I was like, wow, only in Australia are you getting these two movies in the same year.
Yeah, well, she's another one too. Like Toni Collette, like her body of work, her taste is just throughout the years. I can't even cite one sort of bad choice, or one kind of like, I don't see where that one went. She's always given it her all. She's always worked with really interesting storytellers, and such a huge inspiration to a cat like me, trying to make my way out in America. She really did kind of cross the bridge in such a, she did it her way.
Mm-hmm.
She never kind of compromised. You look at the great things that she did. The Sixth Sense, I thought, owed a lot of its success to her performance.
It takes Toni Collette about 5 minutes to be the star of any movie, even if she's not in it for 5 more minutes after that.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true.
Well, and because you're here, and I absolutely love talking about Australian cinema with people. A thing that I talking about the feral nature of your performance in Section 8, and then talking about like the sort of increasingly crazy physicality of what you're doing in Glorious, and then like gravitating toward a character like Mad Max in George Miller's films. There's one of the great traditions of Australian cinema is the madman, is the person unleashed. And I've had the chance to talk to a handful of creators from Australia about like sort of what is that about the sort of DNA of Australian cinema that just lends itself so well to these phenomenally sort of outlandishly boundless characters. And I wanted to hear from you about that. Like if you had any sort of kinship with the Australian madman character, like Toe Cutter, like Max himself, like Jared Jack in Wolf Creek, like anything going on in Wake and Fright, like anything going on in Boar. Like I wanted to hear if you had sort of particular tenets of Australian cinema that you felt very sort of like at home in, or you felt like there was just a sort of regional pride in how these things are presented on screen, because this is one of my favorite topics of conversation.
That's such a gorgeous question, and yes, the answer is yes. To each and every one of those characters, and to each and every one of those stories. It's our weird sense of isolation in Australia, combined with this wanting to break free, and then mashing into that this sense of the colonialism that we did have, wanting to kind of prove that we could stand alone on our own. There's a real sense of pride, that we have this phrase in Australia called the little Aussie battler. It was sort of this sort of a bit of a figment of the cultural imagination, that we were always kind of metaphysically and perhaps existentially going to war every day, trying to prove ourselves, trying to prove that that we had the courage to kind of stand as a nation. So there is this real sense of cultural pride that we do have. And you're talking about the movies that you kind of alluded to. Was that kind of particularly in that sort of 80s, 90s, Australian cinema was just kicking butt.
Wow.
Really had something to say, and the government was fully behind it. What's happened in recent years, though, Jordan, is that for some unknown reason, like Australian moviegoers just aren't turning up to see Australian movies.
I have heard that. I've heard that from so many Australians. They're like, yeah, we get this, we get all these great notices, like, and the films come to the States, and back home, everyone's like, you make movies? Like, wow! You guys are making some of the best movies in the world!
Yeah, but, but for some unknown reason, it's sort of got to make it in another territory first before they can kind of embrace it. And look, we've been trying to change the shift for a while, but it just sort of hasn't happened. I don't know why this just came to my head, but there's a kind of a little known Aussie movie called Van Diemen's Land that's kind of hard to find. But
I don't know this.
Yeah, I highly, highly recommend it. It's definitely a brutal film to watch, but again, so are some of the ones that you mentioned, the Wolf Creeks and the Mad Max.
I think Wake and Fright is one of the most emotionally brutal movies I've ever watched.
Yeah. Well, then there you go.
It's my job here to find like the patterns and everything that we're saying, and it is interesting to me that like characters that have, and people who've been able to take performances to sort of these like iconic levels, like an Axel Foley, like a Maximus, and obviously like a Mad Max himself. These are all characters who are very much defined by the ways in which they don't fit into the natural order. Even Axel Foley, he is very much his own thing within a system that does not replicate individuals like him, which is what makes him extraordinary, what makes him stand out. So I appreciate that in this conversation of talking about like the sort of intrinsic sense of rebelliousness within sort of Australian culture that imbues it into cinema, and what the director Greg McLean told me, he's like, we're a nation of outlaws. Like, we have this strain of like, you know, we started as it was a penal colony and we began as criminals, and so we have this phenomenal sort of tension between civilization and polite society and that which wants to sort of break it open. And I appreciate that each of these characters you've sort of name-checked specifically are ones that are acting against the sort of status quo in order to be the like rising hero. I find a nice tidy bit of symmetry in that.
Oh, me too. Look, and I'm trying to kind of nail down exactly sort of what it is, but it's sometimes for me too, it's recklessness taken to the nth degree, you know, to the furthest, to almost survival. There's this great book that I love called On Boxing by Joyce Carol Oates. She's done such a sort of fabulous expose on boxing, but I kind of look at this particular quote that I'm about to read to you as how Australians, particularly artistic Australians, can kind of process survival. So she says, the boxer must somehow learn by what effect of will non-boxers surely cannot guess. So this is Australians. You know, every time I say boxer, think Australians.
Okay.
To inhibit his own instinct for survival, he must learn to exert his will over his merely human and animal impulses, not only to flee pain, but to flee the unknown. In psychic terms, this sounds like magic, levitation, sanity turned inside out, madness revealed as a higher and more pragmatic form of sanity. So that's kind of
that last line is so good. I mean, I feel like kind of hits the crescendo of glorious, as madness as this kind of refined form of sanity and sort of what it ascends to. And then I immediately, as you're reading that, I'm just thinking of like the movie Razorback and those like intense close-ups on our characters where you just see the wildness of like generations behind them. And it's so evocative.
Oh, I love that expression, the wildness of generations behind them. Yeah, that's great. I mean, look, when you can see that in you know, that's what, oh man, it really makes sort of the very life of you sort of, I don't know, it's lifeblood for me, that those kind of moments when you're standing, you know, in the middle of nowhere in some podunk town, and it's 3-4 in the morning, and everyone's been working their butts off, and you've got this, you know, 4 or 5 page scene to do, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Like, it's just such a crazy, electrifying business and world to be a part of. And then when you you nail it at the end of that day, and everyone's sort of happy, and there's that kind of sense that this is going to live on longer than this moment. You can't help but sort of feel, I don't know, that we did something. That we did something and perhaps even a little bit special.
That is, that times out perfectly with my unfortunate moment where I have to say we have concluded the conversation, and I feel like that is just the bow to put on it. And Ryan, I appreciate you so much taking the time to have this really nice dialogue with me about your career and your work.
Yeah, I can't help but think it's going to be a great day for me. Thank you. You started off in such a great way. I appreciate you.
I hope we're both sending each other off into the world to have a really great day. And congratulations on all 3 movies that you've had come out this year. And I look very forward to that Octavia Butler project that you're talking about.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Keep being the beautiful woman that you are. Really appreciate you. Thank you. This is a lovely interview.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time, Ryan.
Yeah, you got it.
What a pleasure to get a chance to talk to Ryan Kwanten. Thank you again to him. You can see him in so many places this year. Notably, Section 8, which comes out just a week after this episode drops, and it'll be streaming on AMC+. Glorious is streaming on Shudder. Expired, also known as Loveland, is rentable on most platforms, and it sounds like Kindred will be coming to FX. So that's a long list of things where you can see new Ryan Kwanten. So pick one, spin the wheel, choose your adventure. And now the one quick thing before I go. It's rare to have a furniture item in a segment that is meant to be spontaneous and just sort of out of the blue of whatever the moment conjures. But this is spontaneous because when X came out and I was like, I love X, I certainly didn't see it at a festival where like kind of the buzz came out. Like I didn't realize when people were talking about Pearl, a prequel, that it was literally actually happening. I thought it was just like a trailer that was put together for fun as like and here's some bonus, like a button for you. But then like X comes out and it's like, wait, this movie I love is going to have a prequel with one of like starring one of my favorite actors carrying over from the first movie to play the like younger iteration of one of the characters she plays in X. Wow, incredible. Yes, let's go. And it was a feast of Mia Goth to continue. I've seen Pearl. I really like Pearl, and Mia Goth gets to go absolutely buck wild in it. So I'm excited for everybody to experience that. And then Pearl is making its premiere run right now at festivals. It played at Venezia. It just played at TIFF. And coming out of that, much like I think it was South by Southwest was the X premiere, people like critics watching it they didn't get this at Venezia, but critics watching it at TIFF coming out of like a Midnight Madness screening were like, OMG, it's a trilogy. Turns out there was a little teaser cut for a third film in this series. We're riding that Mia Goth train. I have punched my ticket. I'm going to the ends of the earth with it. It is called Maxine with 3 X's. Maxine being Mia's character from X. And this is her. We're following her along on her journey into 1985 Los Angeles. Maxine said she's going to be a fucking star. And whether it's in the San Fernando Valley or it's in Hollywood proper, Maxine with 3 X's, I feel like might be on the cusp of stardom. Maybe she's got herself a reputation in the town. I can't wait to find out. I can't wait to see Mia in 1980s sex worker glam. Like that sounds like a thrill of my lifetime. Those of us who've been toiling in the Mia mines for so long have just been waiting for the world to see what we have seen, find the knowledge we have been in possession of for so long, not only as an incredibly dynamic talent and a ferocious screen performer who it just seems fearless and curious in her role selection, but also is just like a fucking star. She is a movie star, this one. And now she's like, I don't know what, somebody give me the oral history of how this trilogy came about that was seemingly pre-greenlit before anybody knew how these movies would be received or how they would perform. And that's the kind of brio that I want from film executives. Make the fucking blind bet. Say yes to a good idea, to a trusted filmmaker with an incredible cast. Just write the checks, rubber stamp it. Make that movie, shoot the prequel while you're doing it. Don't give a shit about box office returns. Just make the bet. Fear Street, Greenlight 3. Put them out 1 month after the other. It's very exciting. So yeah, Maxine. I don't know when. I kind of hope before the end of the year, just to like have the harmonious, like all wrap it up in 2022, like phenomenal showing kind of thing. But I don't know. I assume it's been shot. I assume it's done. Maybe it hasn't. No idea. I just know that it's Mia Goth. I just know that I've been promised more Mia Goth. And considering the full commitment on her Pearl press tour to wearing I just buried my rich husband outfits onto press lines, I hope we can continue this attitude. I hope that she continues to look like she will fuck and kill your man. And then show up. She will glide into dinner looking gothic fabulous. Mia Goth knows what she's serving, and she's decided to serve it cold. So yeah, that's Maxine. It's coming. So that's the one quick thing. Stay tuned for more updates about the Mia Goth A24 Ty West trilogy. I hope I have more to share. But that, for now, is our show. You can follow us on Twitter at FeelingScenePod or send us an email at feelingscene@maximumfun.org if you want to follow me, where I will probably be talking about Mia Goth. I'm Jorkru on Twitter, JORCRU. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. The show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned.
Audience supported.